Hey guys, picture yourself standing on a windswept ridge at dawn, muscles aching, breath visible in the freezing air, and realizing you've just signed up to haul 5 tons of rock uphill, all before breakfast. You're about to learn why the Great Wall of China wasn't built for comfort, and why nobody who started this mission cared to live it through. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Welcome to part 1 of why you wouldn't survive building the Great Wall of China. If you thought your last workout was brutal, just wait until you hear about ancient conscription tactics, medieval OSHA violations, and the architectural equivalent of hold my beer, the recruitment fair. In theory, recruitment for the wall was voluntary. In practice, volunteer meant, hey, you peasants over there, grab your tools or we'll take your neighbor instead. Imperial edicts demanded millions of workers over centuries, but emperors never bothered to toss out a single please. By the time you got the knock on your door, the local magistrate had already decided your fate. If you were a farmer, carpenter, scholar, or a convicted criminal, congrats. You just hit the labor jackpot. No diploma required. Just bring your suffering to the frontier. Orientation day. Imagine the first day on the job speech. You arrive in a wind-blasted desert, clutching your water gourd like it's the last drop in the world. It might well be. There's no HR department, just overseers armed with whips and an excellent grasp of intimidation. You're handed a crude pickaxe pointed at a craggy outcrop and told to carve a sandstone block while your neighbor hoists another hunk of granite from 200 feet below. No safety goggles, no helmets, just a sun-scorched hat if you're lucky. Spot someone collapse from heat stroke or snap a limb? That's a you problem, and the squad moves on. Daily grind, sunrise to swoon. Your day kicks off before the sun breaches the horizon. A rudimentary bell clangs somewhere downhill. Your personal alarm clock of doom. You stumble out of your lean-to, essentially a half-carved cubicle in the bedrock, chug tepid barley water, and step into waist-high dust. Over breakfast, a gritty porridge that's half grain, half desperation, you're already calculating how many stones you'll lug before the midday break. Morning shove. You and 50 fellow laborers form a human chain, passing wheelbarrows loaded with rubble uphill. One misstep and you're buried under a landslide of your own making. Midday. Lunch. A handful of millet, possibly worm-ridden, delivered in a burlap sack. If you complain, the overseer will remind you that famine in your hometown was worse. Afternoon shift, sharpen the pickaxe, chisel the stone, or help mortar 2 blocks together. If you're lucky, you'll chisel with precision. If not, you'll learn a new meaning for splinter. Water is rationed. If you get extra, it's considered a luxury, like finding a phoenix feather on a broomstick. On days when the well runs low, watch your colleagues fight over the last drop like rabid jackals. Nature, your new nemesis. Building the wall wasn't just a matter of hostility from the Empire. Mother Nature had her own disdain. Summers roasted you alive. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees if 38 degrees C. Scorched wind whipped sand into your lungs, and vast sun-scorched plains offered zero shade. Winter? Ever been free? Zing. Temperatures plunged well below 14 degrees, 10 degrees C. Mud froze around your ankles and your breath shattered ice crystals in midair. Your hands, clamped around a pickaxe, grew so numb you couldn't feel if your fingers were still there. Remember those scholars who bragged about feng shui and harmony with the elements? They obviously never lugged a monolith uphill in Hubei province at midnight. If you survived the day's labor, your reward was a half-frozen tomato, 3 shriveled turnips, and the promise of tomorrow's repeat performance. The overseers, masters of psychological warfare. Your overseer wasn't just a guy with a whip, he was a master of morale destruction. With a single glare, he could reduce a man to tears. He would schedule bonus working hours after the sunset, demanding labor by torchlight. Imagine chiseling blocks in the flickering glow, darkness pressing in from all sides, each strike of your hammer echoing like an executioner's final blow. And if you dared mutter a complaint, you'd be publicly flogged, your back stripes counted as your daily progress on the wall. Battling bugs, the unwanted workforce. When you weren't dodging boulders or suicidal overseers, you were battling an army of pests. Sandflies gnawed at exposed flesh, their bites inching toward infection. Cockroaches used your sleeping mat as a racetrack. Insects so small you couldn't see them crawled into your clothing, emerging at dawn to stage a tiny insurrection. Disease spread faster than gossip: typhoid, dysentery, malaria. If you survived the exertion, you might succumb to a fever. No mercy here. You became fertilizer for the very earth you carved. First days, first deaths. Statistics weren't a thing, just rumor and hushed whispers among the workers. They say last year they lost 300 men building this 100-foot rampart. Bodies were dragged off to mass pits. Cover of night preferred to keep morale barely above zero. You might witness one of your comrades vanish at dusk, then see his bloodied cloak tumble from a crane at sunrise. No funeral rites, no tearful goodbyes, just another grim statistic on the Emperor's ledger. Moments of dark humor. Welcome to the coping mechanism of the damned, gallows humor. Workers chiseled jokes into stones. Petty complaints like, "Emperor's beard itches more than this gravel," or, "At least we'll have a great view of our own graves." They sang bawdy songs about their wives back home, imagining gold-dusted banquet tables as they hacked away at granite. Each laugh was a fleeting rebellion against hopelessness. Why you'd fold? You'd think the promise of imperial favor or a grand afterlife reward would sustain morale. Spoiler alert, those were myths. The wall's completion was a generational project. Your life expectancy measured in seasons, not years. Even if your bone-dry jersey survived, promotion meant switching from pickaxe to jade brush, recording death tallies, hardly a step up. So, 4 days into this ordeal, you're broken. Your joints creak like a creaking thing, your spirit ground to dust, and every night you pray for a thunderstorm, just to wash a bit of grime from your face. This is only the beginning. You staggered through part 1 like a sentient stone chisel, bleeding, exhausted and questioning all your life choices. Welcome back, you masochist. In this chapter, we'll uncover the true nightmare behind logistics, forced migrations, and that little thing called structural integrity. Get your pickaxe. Just kidding. You'll never pick up another one after this. Supply lines from hell. Imagine ordering a pizza. Now imagine the pizza is 10 miles away, cooked by slaves, delivered by vermin-ridden donkeys, and you're in the middle of the Gobi Desert. That's supply chain management on the wall. Food caravans left the imperial granaries long before you did, laden with millet, salted fish, and rotting turnips. They took 3 weeks for a journey that should have taken 3 days, thanks to eroded roads, mudslides, and bureaucrats who believed in schedule flexibility. The Vermin Express, grain sacks breached by rats, weevils, and occasionally small mammals looking for a free buffet. When those sacks finally arrived, the grain inside was either half-eaten or so moldy it could reboot your entire digestive system. Water trucks, ancient edition, wooden barrels strapped to ox-drawn wagons. Leaks were considered part of the experience. On arrival, you often found them empty, rewarding you with a bonus workout carrying a dry barrel uphill to fetch water from a muddy stream. Tools on layaway. Your newly minted pickaxe might arrive 6 months late, replaced in the meantime by a sharpened cow bone. You'd whittle your own shovel handle from driftwood and pray it didn't snap on the first use. Every platoon had an official quartermaster, appointed for reasons no mortal can comprehend. His primary qualifications, nepotism and an allegiance to the bastion of apathy. He'd pocket half the food, sell the other half to native tribes, and tell you he ran out by noon. Your morale sank faster than a wheelbarrow in quicksand. The Great Migration. If you thought forced conscription was bad, try forced relocation. Entire villages uprooted, marched 100-200 miles to unfamiliar mountains. Farmers accustomed to fertile plains were dropped onto rocky ridges where you literally couldn't grow a potato, let alone feed 10,000 laborers. Walking for weeks with your family, you clutched a sack of whatever possessions you could salvage. A faded hat, a small pot of pickled vegetables, a rat you hoped was your pet, not your lunch. Night camps under open sky, pitched tents leaking rain, and guards whose sole joy was shouting, "Move it, worms!" Each dawn you tottered forward, your legs pendulously dangling like overcooked noodles. At journey's end, the promises you'd heard, new fertile lands await, turned out to be as real as unicorns. Instead, you found a cluster of half-built camps and another 6 years of wallstone hell. Your neighbors, once familiar faces at the market, were now stranger voices in the frost, engineering mishaps and innovations. You think the world's largest construction project might employ, competent engineers. Think again. Sovereign architects competed for imperial favor by inventing new techniques. Some were borderline brilliant, most were lethal. The mortar lottery, standard practice was mixing lime, sand, and water to create mortar. But every region claimed to have the secret ingredient: crushed snail shells, fermented yak dung, powdered jade. The result? Unpredictable adhesion. Some sections of wall stuck together for centuries, others crumbled under a hearty sneeze. You'd hammer a block into place only to watch it fall like a bad Jenga move. False foundations. In an effort to save time, overseers ordered foundations laid over swampy ground, covered with thin slabs of rock. This time saver led to entire wall segments sinking into mud, requiring re-excavation just in time for the next monsoon. You'd spend days digging, only to have your trench turn into a fish pond. The Tower of Babel. Effect: workers from different provinces spoke dialects so divergent that when they tried to coordinate, it sounded like a cacophony of animal calls. Orders got mangled, lay the stones became lick the drones. You'd watch in horror as livestock swallowed mortar lumps, thinking they were treats. The labor pyramid scheme. Ever heard of multi-level marketing? The wall was multi-level enslaving. If you were unlucky enough to be a convict, you started at the bottom, quarryman. If your bones held up for a year, you might be promoted to brick carrier. After 2, you could become a mortar mixer. If you survived a decade, congratulations. Now you supervise 500 hapless souls, each one a mirror of your own misery. Promotions didn't come with pay raises, of course. Instead, you inherited the worst tools, the shabbiest lodging, and the most sadistic overseer. Your new role: ensure your former comrades died more stylishly than you did. When promotions stall, despair sets in, and some men choose voluntary suicide over another decade of vertical human conveyor belts. The siege of the elements. As if exhaustion and malnutrition weren't enough, nature staged its own assaults. Spring thaw triggered flash floods, washing away entire passages of wall and hundreds of men. Summer storms unleashed torrential rains that eroded mortar in hours. Fall winds channeled through mountain passes turned your camp into Dante's inferno of dust whirlwinds. When winter arrived, frost heaved stones apart. Mortar shards exploded like miniature grenades. Sleeping in half-frozen lean-tos, your teeth chattered with enough force to crack stone. Some workers tried to build makeshift saunas by lighting campfires under tarps, but ended up asphyxiated in a sauna of death, corpses as construction material. Desperate times called for desperate measures. When quarry supplies ran low and the imperial coffers hit bankrupt, rumor says some unscrupulous overseers ordered bodies to be crushed into plaster. Yes, your dead comrade's skeleton might literally hold up the next 100 feet of rampart. The official record is silent, but the stones sometimes contained flecks of bone. Excavations have unearthed fragments of clay pots mixed with bone dust. Proof that in the race to finish, humanity took a back seat. The core of the exiled. Meet the core of the exiled. Men banished from everywhere. Criminals and dissidents so despised that a lifetime of manual labor was considered mercy. These were the ones who never got to see the sun gate or receive their imperial medals. They died in the shadow of the wall, with only the wind to sing them lullabies. If you somehow survived the quarries, the forced march, and the disastrous engineering, you then applied to join an elite squad, the wall's own cleaning crew. Their job was to fill gaps after landslides, fix collapsing crenellations, and sweep away dust. This was a role of both honor and horror. Honor because they came closest to the imperial court. Horror because the salt-laden winds ate their lungs alive. Famine, disease, and despair. Ever wonder how many people died building the wall? No one knows. Estimates range from 400,000 to 2 million over 2,000 years. Disease was the silent executioner. Cholera, dysentery, tuberculosis, scurvy, the full spectrum of 14th century RPG ailments. Healers set up clinics of mud huts where they bled patients with bamboo tubes and applied herbal poultices. But when the patient count exceeded the doctor count by a factor of 10, the real treatment was goodbye. Famine struck regularly, In 773 CE, severe drought turned fields into dust bowls, grain shipments evaporated, and the wall's population sank into cannibalistic rumors. That year's poet laureate penned an ode to stolen children and starving dogs, but the emperor's court gave him a pat on the back. For bravery, they said. Meanwhile, you scavenged what you could: grass, roots, the occasional rodent, sociocultural clashes and rebellions. The wall spanned hundreds of miles and countless ethnic groups: Han, Qiang, Xiongnu, Turkic tribes. Each brought unique traditions, foods, and superstitions. Crossing cultural lines could be deadly. One tribe refused to step on chicken bones. Another believed eclipses summoned demons requiring constant drum beating. The cacophony of drums, chants, and curses created an ambiance that made your nightmares feel like seaside vacations. In moments of collective madness, tribesmen would revolt. Weapons were crude: axes, knives, or whatever heavy rock you could get your hands on. Rebellions were met with merciless crackdowns. Entire villages were wiped out, their survivors pressed into even harder labor. If you had a choice between peaceful slavery and violent rebellion, well, congratulations on surviving that decision. When empires become ghosts, the wall outlasted dynasties. Sections were built, abandoned, rebuilt, and destroyed again. You might die building the Qi version, only for yours to be raised by a different emperor, then rebuilt by your great-great-grandson, who had even worse pickaxes. That's the tragedy. Your toil vanished, wave after wave, leaving only echoes of your suffering in the wind. By the time the Ming dynasty poured resources into the final version of the wall in the 14th century, they recycled stones from previous walls, many of which had your fingerprints, sweat, and bone fragments. Your legacy, not a monument to human triumph, but a monument to human tragedy. Congrats, you've survived only half the journey. You've endured bungled logistics, forced migrations, engineering monstrosities, and dietary horrors that would make a plague doctor faint. You've seen the dead repurposed as plaster, watched your brothers vanish in the night, and lived to tell the tale. Well, read the tale. Next time in part 3, we'll plunge into the political machinations behind the wall, the massacre of dissenters, and the ghost stories that still haunt its towers. You'll learn why emperors feared the structure they commissioned, and why building it may have sown the seeds of their own downfall. By now, you've hauled, chopped, and starved your way through half the horror show, and guess what? The political game behind the wall is even more lethal than the pickaxes. In this chapter, we'll unmask the court intrigues that turned soldiers into scapegoats, examine the brutal suppression of dissent, and explore the ghost stories that still echo along those crumbling ramparts. Strap in, if your spine hasn't snapped yet. It's about to be bent under the weight of imperial paranoia. Emperor versus Chancellor, a deadly tug-of-war. Picture the imperial court as a snake pit of sycophants and schemers, each vying for a scrap of glory, or enough power to ruin a life. Emperors loved the wall because it looked good on scrolls. Chancellors hated it because it devoured treasury like a rabid beast. When Chancellor Han suggested reallocating funds to famine relief, the emperor snapped back: better starving peasants than naked frontiers. Within days, Han found himself stripped of titles, then accused of conspiring to weaken border defenses. His execution was held at midnight on a frozen terrace of the wall, public enough to terrify anyone else who dared question imperial extravagance. The defender's dilemma officers stationed at the wall faced an impossible choice: defend the frontier or defend their own necks from political fallout. If raids crossed the frontier, question wouldn't be, why didn't you stop them? But, why did you let them live long enough to reach the wall? Some commanders executed entire patrols to cover up their failures. Others sent panicked appeals for reinforcements that never came, only to be indicted for cowardice. Loyalty to the emperor meant sealing your lips when you saw generals flogging peasants to meet impossible quotas. Any hint of sympathy was treason. Spy versus spy imperial paranoia ran so deep that eunuchs and palace guards formed rival spy networks. One faction accused the other of secretly undermining the wall's integrity to invite northern barbarians for amusement. Spies infiltrated camps dressed as laborers, counting limbs broken and teeth chipped, then reporting back with embellished rosters of insurrectionists. Every night, your lean-to might host a clandestine investigation. Who whispered criticism of Minister X? If your name came up, congratulations. Tomorrow you'd be reassigned to a remote beacon tower where frostbite and isolation did the job for your superiors. The massacre of the disobedient one. Chilling winter, a group of workers in Shanxi province finally snapped. Driven to delirium by exhaustion and famine, they rose in revolt, torching supply wagons and killing overseers. The emperor's response was swift and merciless. He dispatched 10,000 cavalry to surround the camp. No negotiations, only a midday assault, spear thrusts through flimsy tents, and a mound of bodies left unburied as a warning. Afterwards, survivors were branded on their foreheads, forced to march naked before being pressed back into service under even harsher conditions. Their whispered prayers for mercy turned to cries of madness as they hunched over shovels once more. The scholar officials lament. Amid the rubble and bone dust lurked educated victims too. Scholar officials, valued for their knowledge of astrology and geometry, were often drafted to design sections of the wall. They sketched grand arches and watchtowers, blueprints so intricate they rivaled palace gardens. But when those structures collapsed within months due to design flaws or shoddy labor, the scholars were publicly humiliated. Forced to kneel in the snow, they read aloud confessions of incompetence, while overseers whipped them for every miscalculation. Some resigned themselves to another round of drafting, their reputations shredded like the mortar bonding their mistakes. The curse of the tower. During the Eastern Han Dynasty, rumors spread that a tower near Yanmen Pass was haunted by the ghosts of 5 executed laborers, men accused of sedition after complaining about unbearable conditions. Locals claimed to hear agonized screams at night, see lanterns bobbing in the wind with no living bearer, and stumbling figures wandering the crenellations at dawn. Soldiers posted there would vanish without trace. Replacements swore never to return. Emperor Ming dispatched shamans to exorcise the spirits. 3 weeks of drumming, chanting, and goat sacrifices. Yet the hauntings continued until the tower was finally demolished, and the ghosts were said to have been sealed underground, moaning in their earthen prison. Whispers on the wind. Folk horror along the ramparts. As the wall snaked across deserts, mountains, and grasslands, each region birthed its own ghost stories. In the Gobi, workers spoke of the blood-red sand that spilled from the dunes at dusk, staining clothing and skin until the dye became permanent. In Liaoning, a lamenting spirit called the Weeping Maiden was said to lure laborers into hidden shafts, where they tumbled to oblivion. And at Jiayuguan Pass, watchmen swore they saw spectral armies clashing on moonless nights, their phantom arrows rattling against stone like hail. These tales weren't bedtime stories, they were survival manuals. If you stranded yourself chasing ghosts, you'd freeze or starve before dawn. The fate of the Builder Kings. Irony ran thick. Emperors who commissioned gargantuan stretches of wall often died in obscurity or violent overthrow. Qin Shi Huang, the original architect of what would become the wall's foundation, spent his final years seeking immortality pills made from mercury. Some say he died clutching a map of the wall, his mouth agape in silent accusation. Later emperors inherited his toxic legacy. The Han general Wang Mang was assassinated while inspecting a new wall segment. Zhou dynasty rulers were deposed by mutineers who cited grief over wall-associated deaths as justification. In the end, the rulers who prized the wall above lives often found their own crowns tearing apart. The greedy merchants gamble, opportunists thrive too. Merchants who supplied the wall with food, tools, and labor travel passes amassed fortunes, until their caravans were ambushed by outlaws or imperial forces suspected them of hoarding supplies. One notorious trader, Li Feng, built a lavish mansion in Xi'an from profits earned feeding wall camps. In a fateful twist, he sold substandard grain to a starving cohort, then tried to bribe the overseer when accusations flew. The emperor ordered Li's family executed, his mansion burned, and his name erased from official records. His fortune vanished, his lineage extinguished, proof that in this enterprise greed was punished as harshly as sympathy. The psychology of despair. Forced laborers developed coping strategies darker than superstition. Some gouged red X's into their forearms to mark days of survival, tallying deaths they outlasted. Others swallowed river stones, hoping to simulate a fatal illness and be carried off to the hospital. where feeble care sometimes meant release from labor. A few preferred suicide pacts. 2 friends would agree to drown in the same cliffside stream, thinking death by water preferable to endless hammer strikes. Yet most endured, forging a brittle resilience that translated into bone-deep cynicism. When the wall finally ended ahead, they emerged not triumphant, but hollowed, unable to find solace even when they reached home. The wall's political afterlife. Centuries later, governors used parts of the wall as political props. During peasant rebellions in the late Ming era, officials would parade captured rebels along the ramparts, broadcasting their confessions to distant villages. They built pavilions overlooking the wall, hosting banquets to toast the dynasty's divine mandate. But each celebration echoed with the memory of those who'd hauled the stones, and with latent resentment that would fuel future uprisings. When the Qing dynasty tore down sections to reuse the bricks, they inadvertently erased mile markers of imperial pride and buried any remaining illusions that the wall guaranteed lasting stability. Why the wall became a ghost of empires past today, the Great Wall is a world wonder, a tourist trap, and a subject of relentless selfie culture. Yet beneath its tourist-friendly parapets lies the imprint of anonymous agony. Every loose brick, every crumbling crenellation is a testament to political hubris and the expendability of human life. You wouldn't survive building it because the wall consumed not just bodies, but hope itself. Emperors used it as the symbol of power, only to find that symbols crumble just as surely as their ill-gotten foundations. In our final installment, we'll confront the wall's enduring legacy, how it shaped border politics, inspired modern revolutions, and earned its place in the collective nightmares of frontier communities around the world. We'll explore restoration efforts that unintentionally erase history and the souls who still pray at its neglected watchtowers. If you think the past couldn't reach you, wait until you meet the ghosts that refuse to stay buried. Brace yourself for the grand finale, because when history screams, it doesn't whisper, and this screech will echo across centuries. By the time you stagger to the wall's terminus, whether at Jiayu Pass in the west or Shanghai Pass in the east, you're a hollow monument to human endurance. Your bones are a stack of bleached syllables, each one telling a story of tears, blood, and sweat. But the Great Wall's final act isn't the last shovel of earth or the last block of stone. It's the echo it leaves in centuries to come. In this concluding chapter, we'll examine how the wall shaped borders, inspired revolutions, and became a canvas for modern ambition, and why even today its ghosts refuse to rest. The moment an emperor died, the wall ceased to be a tribute and became a liability. Successor dynasties gazed upon its zigzag spine, not as protection, but as an expensive albatross. Sections were abandoned, then reclaimed, then pillaged for bricks. Local villagers carried off chunks for their own homes, unwittingly weaving fragments of imperial dreams into their mud walls. In this way, every farmhouse chimney puffing smoke in rural Shaanxi carries a sliver of convict's fingerbone, a shard of scholar's blueprint, a whisper of a laborer's final gasp. The wall didn't just mark borders. It rescued its stones by cannibalizing itself, preserving its curse in domestic hearths. When the Ming rulers realized their financial coffers couldn't sustain endless rebuilding, they tried something novel: fortify the southern end and let the northern stretches collapse. Gibraltar did the same centuries later, but the Ming did it without concrete, just calculus of manpower. Frontier garrisons were relocated, frontier towns shuttered. Notice how you'll find abandoned watchtowers dotting the inner Mongolian steppe? Each is a mausoleum for a shattered dream. Today, those hollow turrets are a photographer's Eden, but they were once homes for soldiers who, in winter, took refuge from wolves only to be buried alive by snowdrifts. In the 19th century, as Qing power weakened, the wall became the stage for rebellions that ultimately toppled imperial rule. Peasant armies marched along its precipices, scaling its heaviest walls with ladders made from orphaned beams. It was a Kafkaesque irony. The same barrier meant to keep barbarians out was repurposed by enraged commoners to overthrow dynasties. When the Taiping rebels approached Beijing in 1853, they bypassed garrisons by following the wall's remote trails. Soldiers, chained to half-built battlements and starving, surrendered en masse. The wall's stones rattled with the echoes of disobedience. Its greatest threat was always the people it oppressed. In the Republican era, the wall was dismissed as feudal relic. Nationalists and communists alike denounced it as divisive architecture. something that separated Chinese from one another. Yet, during the Sino-Japanese War, both sides used sections of the wall as defensive lines, turning old crenellations into machine gun nests. Imagine your pickaxe-wielding ancestor who died under a sunroof of granite, watching enemy mortars tear through the very ramparts he built. The wall's third life was as a battlefield, proof that a monument wrought in human misery can be repurposed to sow still more. In the 1980s, when heritage tourism became a buzzword in Beijing, the wall was rediscovered by the government and by opportunists. Sections near the capital were reconstructed with cement, turning hand-hewn stone into artificial Lego. Visit Badaling today, and you'll find gift shops hawking t-shirts that read, "I climbed the Great Wall," while hundreds of tourists trudge past pristine parapets that never saw a single drop of imperial blood. Meanwhile, remote stretches crumble unseen, their weathered bricks carrying centuries of gloom into oblivion. Restoration projects often strip away the very scars that tell the wall's true story, obliterating the irregular stone cuts that whispered of forced labor and brutal engineering experiments. This is where modern mythology trumps history. Nationalist textbooks praise the wall as unity incarnate, a testament to Chinese perseverance. Children learn that it kept barbarians at bay, rather than that it conscripted citizens to their deaths. School field trips become pageants. Kids in matching uniforms march along glass-paneled walkways, blissfully unaware that beneath their sneakered steps lie mass graves of the nameless. If you're looking for a lesson in historical absurdity, watch group photos on the wall. 8 rows of smiling faces, while beneath their feet, the ghosts of 6 millennia reach up, begging for a proper burial. Yet some people do listen. Historians armed with trowels and notebooks descend on abandoned towers to read the graffiti. Names, curses, fragments of folk songs etched into masonry. They find shards of pottery in foundation trenches, animal bones tossed aside like refuse, and inscriptions in dialects so obscure they defy translation. Each find is a needle in a haystack, but it stitches together the lives of ordinary workers. An illiterate carpenter from Shaanxi, a conscripted scholar from Sichuan, a family of exiles whose only crime was proximity to conflict. These archaeological whispers push back against state narratives, reminding us that monuments have multiple lives: architectural, political, and most importantly, human. In recent years, eco-activists have highlighted the wall's impact on fragile ecosystems. The continuous stone barrier disrupted migratory routes of antelope and faces, channeled floods into unnatural courses, and stripped hillsides of vegetation for mortar. Efforts to green the wall by planting saplings and sealing cracks often use non-native species that further upset ecological balances. In one bizarre twist, a reforestation project in Hebei province planted fast-growing poplars that now tower over the wall, their roots prying stones loose. The very act of preservation can accelerate decay, another chapter in the wall's endless cycle of creation and destruction. So why do so many still flock to this tortured ribbon in the earth? Maybe it's the audacity of human ambition. Maybe it's the lure of walking in the footsteps of emperors and prisoners alike. Or maybe it's simply that once you know a place is haunted, you can't resist paying your respects. At sunset, the wall's silhouette becomes a serrated heartbeat, pulsing with centuries of sorrow and triumph. If you listen closely, you can hear a distant song, the bawdy ditties of laborers, the lament of exiled scholars, the cries of soldiers in ambush. If you think you'd survive building the Great Wall, think again. Even as a spectator, you become part of its narrative, a new voice in its ghost chorus. Each selfie snapped, each stone polished by a tourist's hand, each reconstruction plaque proclaiming, "Built during the Ming Dynasty." These actions perpetuate an illusion of endurance that masks the true legacy, that the structure was never about defense but about domination. Empires rose and fell by it, border towns thrived and died by it, millions of anonymous souls were consumed by it. The wall's final lesson is that human suffering can become immortal, carved into stone for future generations to admire, misinterpret, and repeat. As you step off the ramparts and back into the world, carry with you the memory of every grunt, groan, and gasp that went into each mortar joint. Let it remind you that no grand project is worth a life, that borders drawn in sand can be redrawn by conscience, and that the ghosts of the past are not gone. They're waiting for you to remember, and now you've reached the end of the journey. The wall stands silent once more, but its story lives on, in history books, in footprints on ancient stones, and in hearts attuned to its spectral resonance. If you ever feel invincible, recall this. You wouldn't survive building the Great Wall of China because it was built on the bones of those who thought they could. Imagine waking up to the creak of a swinging yardarm, the stench of unwashed bodies, and realizing your only blanket is the slick of last night's seawater. Welcome to pirate life. Before you even muster the courage to swallow that rancid grog, let me ask you, what made you think you could hack it with a bunch of cutthroats who sharpen their blades on your ribs? In the next 10 minutes, you're going to find out why spending one night aboard a 17th century pirate crew is a one-way ticket to misery. Part 1. Swab the deck or swear you'll die. You stumble aboard at dusk, seasick and starved, clutching the shreds of your dignity. The plank beneath your boots trembles as the jolly cutter pitches in rolling swell. Lanterns flicker, revealing gaunt faces framed by tangled beards, eyes glinting with hunger, and not all of it for the same reasons. You're late for muster, and Captain Blackfin's rapier isn't known for its patience. 1. The induction ceremony. There's no HR or onboarding presentation here, just a blade pressed to your throat and a grizzled quartermaster barking, "What be your name, landlubber?" You stammer out a name that your mother gave you. On these decks, that name dies the moment it passes your lips. Your new moniker will be scrawled on the roster beneath one more drowned recruit. If you survive the night, you get to keep it. They hand you a mop, your first and last cleaning duty. Swab the decks, they growl, or taste the salt water firsthand. You spend the next hour bent over, chest pressed into a wooden plank so slippery, you wonder if the deck itself is alive. Every stroke sends waves of nausea through your gut as the ship rolls and the brine stings your eyes. You wonder if the sweat pouring down your spine will ever dry. 2. The bed of nails. Your bunk is a hammock strung between two beams, swaying like a cradle in hell. No mattress, no pillow, just a length of coarse canvas that digs into your shoulders. Rats the size of mangy cats scurry along the ropes, pausing to nibble on your ankles before vanishing into the darkness. If you roll over in your sleep, you risk falling through a gap and tumbling into the bilge. In that bilge, water sloshes beneath half-rotted planks, thick with the rot of centuries, and likely the bodies of those who tried to escape by climbing down the side. The stench is enough to set your throat ablaze, but it doubles as your nightlight. Floating chunks of debris catch the lantern glow like ghostly lanterns, illuminating the shapes of who knows what swirling beneath. 3. The captain's welcome aboard. Just when you think misery has peaked, Captain Blackfin swaggers onto deck, cutlass in hand, grin wide enough to swallow the moon. He's missing an eye, likely taken by a rival scurvy, but one gleaming orb remains laser-focused on you. He hails you with a guttural bellow. "Tonight you prove your worth. Stand watch at the helm, and don't you dare drift off." You shuffle to the wheel, numb with dread. The helmsman's bench is a plank without a backrest. The wheel spins with the force of Neptune's own tantrum. Every gust of wind tears through your clothes like iron nails. Every wave threatens to hurl you into the abyss. And the sea air? Pepper spray would have been a spa treatment in comparison. 4. The watch of endless screams. Your watch begins under a sky so black it feels solid. You hear the creaking timbers, the howl of wind in the rigging, and, worst of all, the merciless creak of the wheel. Hours stretch like eternity, each minute punctuated by the unexpected crash of waves breaking over the bulwarks. The lanterns flicker so sluggishly you swear they're gasping for life. In the distance, you glimpse phosphorescence, sea glow stirred by swarming plankton, like ghost fire left by drowned sailors. You catch yourself blinking back tears, praying this is just a fever dream. But it's real. With every passing hour, your limbs stiffen, your jaw clenches, and your mind starts to recite nursery rhymes backward in panic. 5. The surgeon's ration. At midnight, a bell tolls, one clanging warning for those lucky enough to survive the night watch. You stumble below decks, head pounding. There, the ship's surgeon sits behind a table, stained with blood and ink, scribbling in a ledger. He squints at you through a spyglass lens. "What be you hurt?" he rasps, voice like gravel. You point at your arms, coated in brine and splinters. He scoffs, dipping a rag into rum and dabbing it onto your wounds. "Rum's as good as any medicine," he declares, tossing the empty bottle at your feet. If you insist on proper care, he'll lecture you on pirate's economy, and then drill a hole in your jawbone to drain evil humors. You count your teeth with horror and back away slowly. 6. The rations of regret. Dawn brings no relief, only a cup of gruel that's half oatmeal, half seawater, with flecks of dried fish scales. You chew mechanically, listening to the others snap at each other over the last scraps. If you try to ask for more, the cook, an oversized brute with a cleaver for a personality, will remind you that hunger builds character, or, more likely, crack you on the skull and reclaim the bowl. 7. The orchard of misery. After breakfast, you're conscripted to forage for food on a tiny piece of land the pirates stole from a passing merchant ship. This orchard is a single barrel of moldy apples, some turnips half chewed by pigs, and a rotting pumpkin that fell from the hold. You dig through the rot like a scavenger, heart pounding as each worm wriggles between your fingers. If you pull something poisonous out, you taste the bile before you taste the flesh. 8. The Code of Conduct, Pirate Edition. You might think pirates live by some code of honor. In reality, the only rules are, don't get caught, and don't stand in the captain's way. Mutiny isn't frowned upon. It's a bullet in the brain if you lose. Step out of line, and you'll spend your final hours chained to the mast, keel hauled until your skin is shredded off your bones. The water's cold enough to flash freeze your entrails. Just another method of discipline. 9. The mental gymnastics. Amid all this chaos, your mind does backflips to stay sane. You invent folk songs about the plank. Oh, give me the plank, O Lord of the brine. Or you recite your wedding vows, or at least what you remember of them. You begin bargaining with deities you never believed in, promising to attend church every Sunday, if only you wake up in one piece. 10. The turning point. Just as you think you can't endure another hour, the lookout cries, "Land ho!" The crew hollers, brandishing cutlasses and pistols, joy surging through them like wildfire. But you know better. Land means hostile ports, naval patrols, and possibly battle. Your battered body would rather face the abyssal ocean than a volley of musket fire. By the time you stagger off the deck at sunrise, knees knocking like church bells, you realize the truth. One night on a pirate ship is an endless gauntlet of filth, fear, and terror disguised as freedom. You swore you'd chase adventure, and instead, you found your grave. What's next in part 2? Come back for part 2, where we dive into pirate politics, the daily drill of sea battles, and why the treasure you dream of is worth less than the salt flakes encrusted under your nails. You'll meet the architects of chaos, the quartermasters, the boatswains, the scurvy-ridden navigators, and discover how a single miscalculation can turn you from pirate to ghost. Stay tuned and remember, sweet dreams are for landlubbers. You thought the hell of swabbing decks, sleepless watches, and rancid meals was the low point? Ha! In part 2, we plunge headlong into the ever-shifting politics of pirate life, the dread of actual sea combat, and the crew hierarchy that devours newcomers faster than the Kraken. If you still believe glinting gold doubloons make any of this worthwhile, fasten your belt, and maybe pack a life preserver, because your stomach is about to do some barnacle scraping flips. 1. The Unwritten Pirate Constitution. Pirate ships ran on a strange mix of democracy and terror. Before any voyage, the crew held a round-robin vote on everything from which ships to rob, to how to split plunder, to whether the cook deserved to live. Sounds civilized, until you realize the vote happens under the threat of cutlass point persuasion. Question the majority, and you're branded a traitor. Show any sign of dissent, and you wake up in irons, or worse, chained in the bilge. When you joined last night, you were forced to swear the Articles of Agreement. You, probably nodding along, lips chapped from salt spray, swore never to raise a hand against a fellow pirate, never to desert, and always to share your spoils. But what you didn't know is that these articles change on a whim. If the captain decides you're too clumsy or too talkative, you find your signature scratched out, your share reassigned, and your future uncertain. Pirate democracy. 1 vote, 1 death sentence. 2. The quartermaster. Your best frenemy. The quartermaster outranks everyone but the captain, controlling provisions, discipline, and distribution of loot. He's also the only man who can order you flogged, or pardon you. Want water? Go beg the quartermaster. Need more gunpowder? Pray he's not in a bad mood. Try to butter him up with grog-soaked compliments, and he'll pocket your wine ration and laugh as you starve. Befriend him, and he might spare you a bed on deck instead of the gunwale. One day into the voyage, you notice the quartermaster disappearing with barrels of brandy. When you ask about your share, he points a bony finger at your ribs and says, "Patience, landlubber." A week later, you catch him stashing stolen silver under his hammock. You think, "I'll rat him out at the next vote," but recall that tipping off the quartermaster is like wrestling a shark, but without the teeth. Better to swallow your pride and most of your earnings in silence. 3. The boatswain's whip. Below the quartermaster lurks the boatswain, or boatswain, the master of discipline. His job is to enforce orders, repair sails, and administer corporal punishment. Imagine your high school hall monitor given a cat o' nine tails and complete immunity. That's the boatswain. Misplace a rope? Whip strike. Drop a cannonball? Trip strike. Stand too close while he's mending the rigging? Surprise strike. The lash tears through your shirt and flesh, leaving welts that throb for days, and bleeding is considered part of the character building process. One morning, the boatswain orders you to splice a broken halyard. Your hands, still raw from yesterday's flogging, fumble. He sneers, "Careful, sailor. Don't drown us all with your incompetence." Then he cracks the whip. You taste blood in your mouth as the lash rakes your back. Every movement forward sends agony rippling through your torso, but you have to finish the splice or face another round. You hurry to secure the line, ignoring the pounding in your head because the alternative is far worse. 4. Navigating with a fever. The navigator charts your course, using primitive tools, an astrolabe, a lead line, and a half-clouded quadrant. At night, he uses the stars. By day, he squints at the sun, pausing between scurvy-ridden smiles to adjust the compass. Accuracy is guesswork, often resulting in dead reckoning, where you estimate position based on speed and time, which means if your navigator is hungover, or lost half his teeth to scurvy, you end up clueless in the open sea, praying for land that might not exist for days. On day 5, you spot a distant mast. The navigator insists it's a merchant galleot ripe for plunder. The boatswain mutters that it's probably a Spanish man-of-war hunting you. Captain Blackfin menacingly asks for opinions. Offer caution and you're branded a coward. Urge attack and you risk being cannon fodder. The vote goes against you. To the guns. The pent-up terror in your gut vaults you onto the deck, cutlass in hand, as 9-pounders roar. You count the seconds until the first cannonball slams into the hull, and into that alarm, it's real. 5. Cannon Chaos Sea. Battles aren't like the heroic duels in storybooks. They're closer to a chaotic grind of noise, smoke, and carnage. You're assigned to the starboard battery, 2 enormous cannons stacked one atop the other. Your duties: swab the barrel, load the powder, ram the shot, run back to fetch more ammo, and stay out of the splash zone when the guns fire. Every discharge recoils so violently it rattles your soul. Misjudge the timing, and you're inside the barrel when they light the fuse, an instant vaporization. Black smoke billows, the deck trembles. The merchant galleot returns fire. A screaming iron ball tears through the rigging, sprays splinters across your face, and sends you tumbling. You scramble to your feet, ears ringing, vision blurred. The cannon crew scrambles too, everyone frantic, shouting orders you can't decipher. Sailors slip on oil and blood. The boatswain screams over the din, "Reload! Oars swim with the fishes!" You shove the next shot into the barrel, knowing that if you bung it, you either blow the ship's own deck off or get flogged. 6. Loot or lobotomy. Victory tastes like soot and rotten fish. Once the merchant ship is disabled, you board, expecting chests of gold. What you find is half-rotted cargo of salted beef, a few copper ingots, and a chest of false coins, counterfeit stamped with your own likeness as the new pirate king. The quartermaster's face splits in a grin while your stomach drops. There's no talk of booty. Instead, you're handed a meager handful of copper and a curt order to get back to your station. As you trudge off, the captain yawns and says, "Better luck next time." He pockets the real coin, leaving you to wonder if you're the pirate or the plunder. If you protest, he reminds you that treason is punishable by marooning, a death sentence on a deserted island with nothing but your own regrets. So you swallow hard and tuck the copper into your ragged coat, because even cursed coin beats walking the plank. 7. Scurvy and the surgeon's punch-drunk remedies. Scurvy creeps in like a thief. First your gums bleed, Then your joints ache so badly you can't hoist a sail. The ship's surgeon, whose medical training consists of a single textbook and a lifetime of rum, prescribes nutritious diet, a draught of salted cod brine, some pickled onions, and elixir distilled from seaweed. None of these cures does squat for vitamin C deficiency. You grow gaunt, teeth loosen, and your breath reeks of rot, yet you're expected to man the rigging every dawn. When your condition worsens, the surgeon proposes bloodletting. He plunges a scalpel into your arm, drains half a pint, and warns that if you survive the night, you should count yourself lucky. You wake up cold, half delirious, limbs useless. The crew teases you mercilessly. "Good night, old man Scurvy. See you at breakfast if you don't bleed out." The nursemaid shrugs, gathering your discarded bandages like souvenirs. Your mortality rate on this ship rivals that of the Spanish flu. And at least flu victims get sympathy. 8. Mutiny and its discontents. When conditions worsen, food rots, guns misfire, sick bodies stack in the bilge, whispers of mutiny spread like wildfire across the decks. The quartermaster pushes for revolt. The boatswain covertly arms loyalists. The captain seethes. He threatens to hang the first man who utters mutiny aloud. But desperation drives men to madness. They sharpen axes, stash powder, and signal allies below decks. On the night of the mutiny attempt, the crew gathers under the cover of storm clouds. They converge on the captain's cabin, swords drawn. You find yourself caught in the middle, wondering if loyalty to the captain is less deadly than loyalty to your fellow pirates. A single misstep, tripping over a barrel, flicking a lantern, sends a shower of sparks onto the gunpowder stash. The hold explodes in a thunderclap so fierce it cracks boards on deck. The ship shudders, groans, then bursts into flame. 9. The phoenix that never rises. In the aftermath, you stagger onto the deck, soot-caked and coughing. Everyone is either dead or blinded by debris. The ship drifts in charred ruin, sails torn to rags, hull riddled with bolt holes. You're left clutching a single copper coin and a broken cutlass, watching your floating nightmare burn itself into the horizon. If you try to swim for shore, sharks patrol the waters. If you wait, the tide will drown you. Some survivors cling to driftwood like corks, praying the sun will burn away the dark stains on the ocean. You think of home, of soft beds and fresh bread, but the open sea isn't forgiving. It's a graveyard where ghosts of greed haunt every wave. 10. Lessons in sea-spun horror. 1 night aboard a pirate ship is misery, 2 nights is madness, 3 nights you're a monster. Part 2 has shown you that the politics, the battles, the betrayals, and disease all conspire to break body and spirit. You're not a rogue hero. You're a disposable cog in a machine fueled by cruelty and shaped by chance. If you still crave adventure, remember this. Every legend of buried treasure is soaked in the blood of thousands. Every victory at sea is paid in broken backs and shattered bones, and every escape by swimming away is just an invitation for sharks to christen you their own. What awaits in Part 3? In Part 3, we dive deeper into the pirate subculture, the secret rituals of initiation, the role of women at sea, the supernatural superstitions that guided navigation, and the final reckoning when age, disease, or betrayal drags you under. We'll meet infamous figures like Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and Captain Kidd. Then ask, could you outlie a legendary swashbuckler? Tune in next time and keep your cutlasses sharp, because the next chapter cuts deeper than any blade. By now you've survived the deck swabbing, the whip-crack discipline, the cannon smoke, and the bilge rat surgeon. Welcome to the heart of pirate society, where every secret handshake hides a dagger, and the only certainty is betrayal. In this chapter, we'll plunge into initiation rituals that scar more than skin, the uneasy place of women among rogues, the superstition-soaked navigation that steers you toward doom, and the slow decay of mind and body that turns even the fiercest buccaneer into ghostly wreckage. Blood oath under a black flag. Before you earn any share of plunder, you must prove allegiance to the jolly cutter by crawling through ritual fire, literally. After evening watch, the quartermaster rolls out a carpet of tar-soaked hemp and lights it. One by one, fresh recruits stripped to the waist, clutch a sacred pistol, unloaded they promise, and crawl across the smoldering mat. Each branded shoulder mark isn't just a badge of honor, it's a reminder that your skin belongs to the crew now. The burns blister, bleed, and sting for days, But if you refuse, the boatswain whips you until the smoke from your flesh rivals the bonfires. The Sisterhood of the Slash. Contrary to legend, pirate ships did include women, though never by polite invitation. Anne Bonny and Mary Red-style infiltrators hid as cabin boys or fought disguised in men's clothes. When their secret was revealed, the crew either executed them on the spot, or, if charmed by rum-soaked bravado, allowed them to stay under one condition: they dueled the worst drunkard aboard. Win, and you earn respect and trousers. Lose, and you're keel-hauled for duplicity. Few women survived the combat unscarred, but the survivors claimed their own bunks, their own pistols, and their own dark legends. Cartography by Curse's pirates didn't trust celestial navigation alone. They engraved wind-buttressed rocks with curses to guide future crews. Turn east past Devil's Teeth or your bones will feed the barnacles, warned one granite monolith off Cuba. Each map was a Rorschach blot of superstition. Ink-blotted whale oil stains, cryptic symbols for mermaid colonies, skull-shaped reefs drawn in red chalk. Soon, every voyage felt like a trial by myth. The navigator would squint at the stars, then spit, muttering, "May Davy Jones have your soul if you misread the storm line." If a storm veered off predicted course, the superstitious blamed witches at, see, not flawed instrumentation, the symphony of screams. On a moonless night, when the jolly cutter drifted in doldrums, the crew held midnight entertainments. Tied to the yardarms, men reenacted the day's flogging, while others played makeshift drums on empty rum barrels. Howling chants drowned the wind, a twisted symphony celebrating suffering. If you tried to sleep through it, you risked a cutlass strike. By dawn, your eardrums rattled, and your heart beat in panic code, an involuntary reflex that lingered long after the ritual ended. Sea witch trials. When illness struck, yellow fever, cholera, or the plague of scurvy, the captain convened a sea witch trial. Accusations flew. Someone must have cursed the ship. The accused was dragged before a mock tribunal of drunken lieutenants wielding rusty dirks. Evidence included stepping on a lizard, bad omen, sneezing aft of the mast, spite of Poseidon, or owning mismatched socks, witch's attire. Verdict: guilt. Punishment: bound in sailcloth and thrown into the lee-side flutter, where you'd either drown or be beaten to death by flailing canvas. Sail-wet execution was considered swift mercy compared to lingering sickness. Midday mutiny market. Once a week, if the sea was calm, the quartermaster hosted a barter fair on deck: tobacco for bullets, women's hair for brandy, fresh fruit for time off from the watch. It sounded civilized until the market turned savage. Wildcard trades included a night's worth of blankets for a single loaf of bread, or 2 broken muskets for an hour in a hammock. Soap was the most coveted currency. An ounce of it could buy you 2 days of lighter labor. If you tried to hoard supplies, you found your chest pilfered, your hammock slashed, and your reputation shredded. The Codex of Curses and Contracts. Each pirate crew maintained a living document, the Codex written in mud-smeared leather. It detailed shares of loot, fines for theft, code for behavior, and the list of traitors, crossed out when disappeared. Breaking the Codex meant half a share and a ceremony where your ears were nailed to planks for a day. If you tore pages out, you'd be press-ganged into a galley, rowing chained to your mates as punishment. The Codex was sacred, but only until the captain rewrote it. Storm-forged madness. In the heart of a tempest, sanity snaps. The jolly cutter groans under towering waves. The deck tilts at lethal angles. Sailors cling to ropes as lightning cleaves the sky. Here, every scream counts as a prayer, for calm, for deliverance, for death. Few survive the nightmares that follow. They wake twitching, eyes wild, convinced of sea demons hiding in every shadow. Some throw themselves overboard to escape their own thoughts, preferring shark-kissed oblivion to a mind haunted by thunder. The Siren's Reward legends say a pirate who survives 3 years at sea earns a single wish from the fabled Siren's Lodge, a hidden grotto of merfolk who grant one boon. Spoiler, no one's ever found it. Those who swear, they did return blind, mute, or with fins grafted onto their limbs, proof that bargains in this world are paid in blood. The Siren's promise kept crews chasing horizon cliffs, wrecking against unseen shoals, all for the hope of safety that never comes. The Final Watch. As part 3 closes, you stand on deck at dawn, hollow-eyed and hollow-hearted. The quartermaster eyes you with suspicion. The boatswain cracks his whip just to remind you he's still alive. Your crewmates share furtive glances, some plotting your end, others plotting their own. Your uniform is a patchwork of scars, your lungs rattling with coughs, and your soul priced cheaper than a crate of moldy apples. If you think one more night aboard the Jolly Cutter might bring fortune or glory, think again. This ship devours time and tears, replaces flesh with fear, and trades hope for horror. In part 4, we'll confront the ultimate reckoning, encounters with naval warships, the torment of marooning, the bitter aftermath for the few who reach land, and why even rescue can feel like a new sentence. Stay alive, if you can, and prepare for the grand finale. You thought you'd see land and breathe freely? Think again. Welcome to the grand finale, where naval frigates loom on the horizon like steel gods. Marooning is the modern guillotine, and rescue often means a cell in a dank colonial prison. Your bones have been polished by salt and fear. Your spirit has been ground beneath deck planks. In this last chapter, you'll learn why surviving even one day back on land can feel like a punishment almost as cruel as pirate life itself. 1. The rear guard ambush. Just before dawn, the lookout hollers, "Sails on the starboard bow." Your heart hammers as the elegant lines of a Navy frigate crest the horizon. These aren't merchant ships ripe for plunder. They're floating arsenals armed with dozens of cannons, steel hulls, and trained gunners who've sacrificed dreams for duty. The captain barks orders, prepare to engage or surrender. You choke on sea spray. This is no raid, it's a death sentence. Boarding the frigate feels like storming a fortress. Muskets thunder, splinters rain, and every inch gained costs more blood. You duck behind fallen spars as grape shot tears through the deck, each shard a reminder that this war is no tavern brawl. When the Jolly Cutter's mast snaps and the deck lists, the captain shouts, "Abandon ship!" You scramble over the rail, plunging into cold, ink-black water, your pockets heavy with cunning knives and cursed coins. 2. The marooning ceremony. If you survive the currents, you'll discover the most infamous pirate punishment, marooning. Backlit by the retreating frigate's lanterns, you're stripped of weapons, left with a single water flask and a handful of stale biscuits. They push you onto a speck of sand, an uninhabited cay no larger than a coffin lid. The ship drifts away, its silhouette swallowed by night. You scream, but your voice dissolves into the wind. The tide laps at your ankles, the sun will burn you to a husk. Your companions abandoned here may betray you for your last ration or refuse to share the flask. Desperation drives men to brutal choices. Some slit each other's throats for a mouthful of water. Others wander aimlessly until they collapse. If a fever strikes or a sea snake finds its way into your hammock of palm fronds, there's no surgeon's tent, only a lonely grave beneath coconut palms. 3. The false rescue. Hope flickers when you spot another ship on the horizon. You wave a shirt like the signal flag, collapse toward the surf with joy, and then they fire a warning shot. It's a slaver's sloop. They board you like your cargo, shackling arms and legs. There's no talk of freedom. You're bound for the next auction block. If you're lucky, you'll be sold to a plantation owner who calls you cheap labor. If you're unlucky, you'll feed sharks in the galleys. Freedom exchanged for one ordeal is simply the start of another. 4. The colonial dungeon. Should you ever reach civilized docks, perhaps by bribing a corrupt magistrate or staging a daring escape, you'll find no hero's welcome. Instead, you're thrown into a dank cell, wrists chafing at the manacles, fleas feasting on your scabbed flesh. Guards slap your face when you ask for bread, rats gnaw at the straw bedding. You beg the chaplain for absolution, but his prayers are drowned by the clank of chains and the howl of other inmates. Trials for piracy are perfunctory. Clothing ripped from your back, you stand before a judge who reads charges as if they're bedtime stories, then bangs the gavel. Guilty, sentence, draw and quarter. There's no mercy petition, you're cattle to justice. You press your back against the wall, mouth dry, imagining that clean bed you once knew. Instead, you taste bile and iron bars. 5. The public spectacle execution day arrives like a carnival of cruelty. Crowds gather at the scaffold, children stare wide-eyed, merchants sell fried dough and rum. You're dragged through the cheering streets, your name spat like a curse. At the gallows, the hangman's noose is adjusted until the knot bites your throat. A hood covers your face. You hear the creak of the trapdoor, the snap of your neck, then blackness. If you're particularly notorious, they quarter your body and display the parts along the coast as a warning. Your skull might perch on a pike, grinning at gulls. Your arms might dangle from city gates. You become a literal cautionary tale, so that every aspiring pirate thinks twice before signing on with rogues. 6. The survivor's shame. A few do escape death by hanging. They limp back to taverns and harbor inns, bones aching, skin pale as chalk. Yet society shuns them. They're barred from respectable employment, labeled as criminals even if they never drew a sword. Women who survived Anne Bonny's legacy find no welcome in port towns. They haunt brothels, tell their tales for coin, and wind up back in chains or worse. The trauma of pirate life leaves scars deeper than any lash mark. Many survivors turn to espionage or smuggling, living in shadows, always watching their backs. They form secret networks, whispering codes in darkened alleyways. Yet they carry the same curse, once a pirate, always hunted. They end up in dank hideouts or exile in distant colonies, hearts hollowed by betrayal. 7. The ghostly reputation. Long after your bones dissolve into sand, your name may survive in whispered legends. Tales of the mad corsair who defied the crown, songs sung in dimly lit taverns, ghost ships glimpsed on foggy nights. Travelers swear they see phantom sails, hear distant shanties carried on the wind. These are the echoes of your agony, immortalized not as heroism, but warning. The sea never forgets, and the living perpetuate your nightmare with every retelling. 8. The price of legend sells well. Publishers print your exploits, painters immortalize your figurehead, playhouses stage your last stand. Tourists visit your haunted quarters, dropping coins in dim rooms you once occupied. Yet each souvenir treads upon bones you shed, each postcard glosses over the horrors you endured. Your story becomes entertainment, sanitized for profit, while the true suffering gets buried beneath layers of myth. 9. The modern resonance. Today, we romanticize pirates, flamboyant costumes, cinematic duels, treasure maps with X's. But behind every swashbuckling fantasy lies a tapestry of misery, starvation, disease, betrayal, and sadistic discipline. We cheer the rebel against tyranny, ignoring that pirate tyranny was often as brutal as any empire's. If you think you could last a night, remember, real piracy was less Jack Sparrow and more a living hell that devoured flesh and soul. 10. The final reckoning. So here's the truth. You wouldn't last a night in a 17th century pirate crew because pirate life was engineered to break you, body, mind, and spirit. You were a tool for violence, a statistic for terror, a footnote in maritime atrocity. The only glory was survival itself, and even that was dubious. At dawn's first light, if you woke at all, your triumph was simply that you hadn't yet slipped beneath the waves. Now you know the real cost of chasing rum-fueled dreams of freedom. Pirate lore will always beckon, but its call is soaked in blood. Better to admire the Jolly Roger from a safe harbor than to let it swallow you whole. Keep this cautionary tale in mind. Legends may glitter, but the truth never lies. It cuts deeper than any cutlass. And if you ever feel tempted by adventure, remember the ones who paid the ultimate price so you could hear their story. Hey guys, picture this. Blood-chilled wind stabbing through your tattered coat, your toes gone numb hours ago, and the only thing keeping you moving is the promise that the Cossacks haven't cut off your head. Yet. That was your 10-second warning. Now, strap on your boots, if they still fit, tighten your belts, and let's dive into part 1 of why you'd freeze to death on a Napoleonic winter march. It's late November 1812. You're a conscript in the Grande Armée, trudging toward Moscow beneath a sky the color of old iron. Your gaiters flapping loose, exposing a calf mottled purple. You think back to your mother's stew in a warm hearth. Memories that feel like fairy tales. 1. The call to arms in frostbite. Napoleon promised glory in winter quarters in a captured city. Instead, you got a draft notice and 3 paltry blankets. As you shove off from Smolensk, officers bark orders over the whistle of gale-force gusts. March! March! The word bounces off frozen villages where shutters hang ajar, previous inhabitants long since fled or starved. You shoulder your musket. It's heavy, icy, and useless when your fingers can't bend. 2. The march begins into the great cold day. 1. You stamp your feet, stamp your feet, stamp your feet, praying to feel them again. The path ahead is a ribbon of snow, flanked by silent birch forests. Each crunch underfoot sounds like a death knell for your toes. The officer's tattered map promises a village just beyond that rise, but when you crest the hill, there's nothing but more snow and the echo of your teeth chattering. 3. Rations. A tale of starvation by the spoonful lunchtime, sort of. A half-frozen loaf of black bread and watery soup made from turnip peels. You gulp it down so fast you nearly choke. Surrounding you, comrades share rumors of foraging parties returning empty-handed, or worse, never returning. Someone cracks a joke about eating leather from their own boots. You laugh through numbing pain, knowing the punchline is your life. 4. The anatomy of frostbite. Your nose stings like a blistering inferno. Your cheeks feel like they're splitting open. Fingers go first. They turn white, then glossy, then dead. When you try to reload, the ramrod snaps because your gloved hands are feeble claws. You drop your musket and curse, only to realize the words won't come out, your lips frozen stiff. Every breath you exhale crystallizes in front of you as a ghostly plume. 5. The nightmare of night watch. Night falls in an instant. There's no twilight, only a plunge into starless void. You shift position in your meager shelter of canvas and snow, trying not to press bare flesh against steel-cold earth. The sentry next to you moans in his sleep, his breath ragged until it stops altogether. A quick prod confirms he's gone. You sit bolt upright, heart pounding, staring at his frozen corpse as if it might still speak. 6. The whip of the commander's voice. At dawn, the colonel's voice cuts through the camp like a saber. He demands another 10 miles before the sun can climb. You stagger to your feet, joints protesting. You trudge forward, plume of your shako drooping, dragging one leg that refuses to bend. Stragglers collapse in the snow. Some survive, some are left behind, snuffed out by the cold or Cossack patrols. There's no mercy for the weak. 7. Desperation and dark humor. In the trenches of misery, gallows humor blooms. A private carves comical caricatures in the snow, portraits of Napoleon with icicles for teeth. You laugh so hard your breath hurts, but laughter is medicine, until you realize you've laughed so much your cheeks have cracked. The medic dabs your chin with brandy, his version of first aid, then moves on to the next frozen casualty. 8. Nature's silent assault. You'd think the enemy would fire cannonballs, but winter is the deadliest foe. Gale winds scour exposed flesh. Snowdrifts swallow trenches, rivers freeze into mirrors that lure men to slip and shatter hips. Wolves prowl at night, attracted by the scent of flesh and the faint heartbeat of survivors. You huddle with a buddy, pressing your back against his chest for warmth, ignorant that soon you'll both be so numb you can't feel each other's pulses. 9. The myth of retreat. Whispers circulate of an order to pull back, but by the time it reaches your battalion, it's lost in the blizzard. Commanders cling to Napoleon's promise of glory. You cling to thoughts of home. You glance back toward France, only to see endless white fields. There is no retreat, only the slow grind of frozen death. 10. A glimpse of the abandoned village. On the third evening, you stumble into a deserted hamlet, doors ajar, hearths cold, children's toys strewn in the snow. You sift through ruined cabins, finding half-burned logs and rotted potatoes. You shove handfuls into your coat, hoping for flavor that never comes. Outside, the wind howls through broken windows like a chorus of the damned. If you think part 1 ends here, think again. You're only 10 miles into an odyssey of suffering, where each step costs blood and bone. In part 2, we'll dive deeper into the brutal logistics of supply, or the catastrophic lack thereof, the fate of stragglers caught by Cossack raiders, and the dark secrets of survival that can turn a soldier into a cannibal. Stay frosty, if you still can, and prepare for the next chapter in winter's deadliest march. You thought frostbitten toes and bone-numbing wind were the worst of it. Strap in. Part 2 delves into the catastrophic collapse of supply lines, the grotesque improvisations of field hospitals, and the ever-present threat of Cossack raiders turning your frozen rear guard into a frozen graveyard. If you still believe empires can tame nature with discipline and bayonets, Prepare to be thoroughly disabused. 1. Supply lines on life support. The morning after you pillage that abandoned village, you join the quartermaster's slog as he attempts to distribute rations. Picture a man with half a map, 2 penurious clerks, and a horse team that's collapsed in the snow. They've been ordered to deliver bread and brandy to 10 divisions, each a 20-mile march apart. By the time the supply sleighs reach you, the bread is so waterlogged it disintegrates at the slightest touch. The brandy has frozen solid into jagged ice shards. The flour sacks have torn open, feeding local rodents faster than you. You watch in horror as a sergeant tries to carve a loaf with his saber. Snap, it breaks like stale plywood. The quartermaster shrugs, eyes hollow. Such is war. As you shuffle back to the column, you clutch a single crust, knowing it's meant to last you 2 days. 2. Field hospitals or frozen morgues. When frostbite reaches the bone, the Army's medical corps springs into action. Their tents are ragged tarpaulins pitched over half-collapsed wagons. Inside, frost lines every surface. Splints are cobbled from splintered musket staves. Bandages are torn from soldiers' own shirts. The surgeon, whose training peaked at barber school, wields a rusty lancet guided by rum fumes. Amputations, by candlelight. To save your hand, the surgeon lights a single dripping candle. The wax freezes on his gloves, turning them into brittle iron mitts. He slices through your wrist, bones scraping like chalk on slate. You howl, but the surgeon is already moving on. Your screams muffled under a pile of half-dying comrades. Bloodletting for all. Every malady, from pneumonia to paranoia, is treated with cupping and leeches. Unfortunately, the cups are inverted tin canteens scorched to sterilize, except they never were. Pus seeps into the blood, turning white uniforms into dread-speckled nightmares. Morale pills, literally. Lacking real medicine, one enterprising corporal mixes a tonic of powdered rat fur, camphor, and distilled hoof oil. He administers it in brown sugar lumps. You bite in, gag on fur, then stagger back into the line, convinced you've been pardoned from half your suffering, until you taste hoof. By the end of the day, more souls shuffle into the field hospital than leave it. The surgeon shrugs. Victory demands sacrifice. You clutch your patched greatcoat and vow never to land there, until you slip on the ice and wake up amid amputated limbs. 3. The Cossack's Midnight Lullaby. When the supply wagon finally limps past your brigade, it's under escort of dragoons, but they're cavalry without horses riding frozen sleigh tongues. That night, you huddle in your makeshift bunker, dreams haunted by hoofbeats. At 2 a.m., the distinct jingle of sabers on harness rings out, except no harness exists. Cossacks descend like phantoms, tall, lean riders wearing fox fur hats, faces painted with frost. They slash tents, yank men from their bunks, and spike your stokers on impromptu stakes. They laugh, human laughter inhuman in its joy of cruelty. You crawl through the snow, mangled and half alive, crawl to your uniformed friends, only to find bodies stacked like cordwood. Darkness swallows your prayers. 4. The paradox of progress, ice roads and frost forges. Napoleon's engineers boast of cutting fortified ice roads across rivers, shining sheets of treacherous glass meant to speed artillery. Here's the reality. Teams heave cannons onto the river's surface. The ice groans like a dying beast. Suddenly, thunder cracks, the ice fractures swallowing horses, guns, and men in an instant. The artillery drifts beneath the ice. You hear panicked thrashing, muffled cries, then darkness. Meanwhile, frost forges are hastily erected, furnaces stoked with firewood chopped from local churches. The smoke never clears. Inhaling it is like drinking molten lead. Blacksmiths try to shoe horses, but nails shatter like brittle twigs. The forges collapse under heavy snow, crushing those inside. All this for a cannibalized supply train that never reaches the front. 5. The Cannibal's Quandary. Desperation drives men to unthinkable choices. Rumors spread of troops boiling leather belts for gelatin, sucking marrow out of cattle bones. They call it veterinary soup. But when a regiment from the rear guard disappears, whispers turn darker. Some snarled they saw cooking pots simmering with chunks of human flesh. You cross yourself at dawn, tear into your overcoat for a roasted potato slice, only to find none. Hunger gnaws at your sanity. They call it operational necessity. You call it murder. Still, when you think of lying awake with your stomach rumbling louder than cannon fire, thoughts of rabbit stew seem almost heroic. But every time you lift a spoon, you wonder, will this taste like your friend, Corporal Dubois, who collapsed 2 miles back? 6. Desertion, sin or salvation, some souls break. In the dead of night, you hear a distant gunshot. Another deserter executed for daring to seek shelter. Others slip away stealthily, disappearing into forests of birch and spruce, hoping to reach a peasant hut before wolves do. The deserters who succeed emerge days later, frostbitten, half-mad, bearing fruit from the very farms Napoleon's soldiers burned. They're hailed as heroes by the locals, but soon enough, Cossack trackers haul them back, traitor scum. They're flogged publicly, then marched back to the line as living warnings. 7. The cultural collision. As your march weaves through Belarusian villages, you witness culture shock at its harshest. Villagers prostrate at your approach, begging for bread. Then at night, drunk on moonshine, you stumble into their homes harvesting what food remains. The villagers curse your name in frost-cut tongues. Their children watch from hidden doorways, terror in their coal-black eyes. When the Cossacks retaliate, they burn the huts, smoke drifting like anguished ghosts. You press on, haunted by the ruin you leave behind, conscience numbed as your limbs. 8. The weight of frozen equipment. Your musketeer's kit was designed for spring campaigns. Polished wood, iron fittings, leather pouches. Now every strap is frozen. Iron buckles tear through your gloves, and each bayonet weighs twice as much. Lace-up gaiters turn into iron fetters around your calves. When you stumble, the gear drags you down, turning each fall into an avalanche of metal and leather. The officer sneers at your struggle. This is soldiering. He advances, commanding you to pick up your kit and march. You do, once, then collapse. He draws his saber. Move, or I'll make snow angels from your entrails. You stand. 9. The collapse of command. Napoleon himself is hundreds of miles ahead, issuing grandiose bulletins about seizing Moscow by Christmas. The generals circulate orders through a chain of frozen infantry, cavalry, and engineers, none of whom have horses or ink. By the time a dispatch reaches your colonel, it's been trampled, half illegible, and possibly written in a dialect no one speaks. He halts the column to interpret. Meanwhile, you sink into the snow, puny and helpless. Mutiny murmurs among officers, too. They argue over whether to bivouac in a drivable riverbed or press on to a fortress rumored to have coal stores. Debate rages in biting winds as men expire by the dozen. Ultimately, they choose cavalry logic. Charge, you charge, into the void. 10. The refuge that never was legend spoke of a supply depot at Vitebsk, stocked with furs, food, and friendly faces. You trek for days across white plains, vision blurring with exhaustion. At the coordinates, you find nothing but a frozen wasteland. No depot, no shelter, only a solitary church steeple where a single surviving bell rings out mournfully in the wind. You slip inside, pray for warmth, only to discover the bell was made of wood. Eyes stinging, you stagger outside into a blizzard so thick you can't see your own hand. You sink to your knees, whisper a prayer for home, then lie back to let the snow cradle you. A single thought warms your mind. At least you won't freeze alone. What awaits in Part 3? If you thought this was unbearable, strap on your remaining mittens. Part 3 will take you into the heart of Moscow's ruins, where starvation becomes spectacle. Diplomatic envoys barter live horses for bread, and the Grande Armée discovers winter's cruelest trick, Arctic warfare fought within stone walls. We'll explore how Napoleon's war machine cannibalizes its own cavalry, how deserters become bargaining chips in prisoner exchanges, and why the human body simply refuses to comply with imperial ambition. Stay barely alive, and join me next time when we march into the very belly of the frozen beast. You thought trudging through empty villages and outrunning Cossack raids was the apex of misery. Welcome to the ruined outskirts of Moscow, where the spoils of conquest turn to salt-damaged hunger, and the boldest tactical mind feels like a lost child in a frozen cathedral. In this chapter, we'll wander through deserted streets stacked with corpses, witness the barter of flesh for grain, and see how even the grandest army mutates into a huddle of scavengers and ghosts. 1. Approaching the Great White Mausoleum. By day 22, the skyline of Moscow emerges through swirling snow, a ragged silhouette of onion domes and shattered spires. You march beneath banners torn to tatters, imagining triumph, until you crest the hill and find the city burned to cinders. Flaming timbers drip molten embers into frosty air. Black smoke coils like a viper's tail. The streets are impassable, littered with abandoned wagons, frozen horses still strapped to harnesses, and dead civilians half buried in drifts. You wonder if Napoleon ever planned for victory, or just admired his own map-making. 2. The Grand Soup Kitchen of Horror Command orders you to occupy the remains of a husk of a bakery. Inside, you find sacks of grain, unopened but rotten, crawling with maggots. Nearby, a makeshift soup kettle hauls in water from a half-thawed well, pumped by seizing hands. Officers declare it edible. You fill your tin cup, fish out a couple of slick kernels, and swallow before thinking. The taste is, how to describe, like chewing mud that's also alive. Yet you drink every drop because the alternative is gnawing on your own belt. 3. Prisoner for bread exchanges. As desperation mounts, the quartermaster hatches a plan. Trade captured Russian officers as hostages for carts of bread. No one asks whether the Russians have bread to spare, only that you deliver captives in exchange for rations. You trudge into the Kremlin's frozen courtyard, leading a dozen pale, ragged prisoners. Guards toss you 3 loaves and a wheel of cheese so moldy it glows under your lantern. You stagger back, clutching your meager prize, and wonder how quickly the Russians will find another use for your fellows. Human lives have become just another commodity, a thought that chills you more than the wind. 4. A cathedral turned hospital, or a morgue. Seeking shelter, you slip inside the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Its gilded domes collapsed, walls streaked with soot. Inside, the altar stands among stacks of frozen bodies, soldiers and civilians piled like cordwood. Permission to set up a field hospital feels like desecration. Half-alive comrades lie wrapped in discarded banners, limbs twisted by frost. The medic sprays brandy into open wounds, dismissing moans as insubordination. You realize your own survival depends on ignoring the wails of the dying, because every heartbeat reminds you of your own fragility. 5. The winter siege of civilization. Outside the city walls, cavalry patrols skirmish with Cossacks who braid dead horses' tails into their own beards. On all sides, fields once heavy with grain are white desolation. Farmers huddle in cellars, selling a handful of potatoes for a soldier's last crust. When you try negotiating, they laugh through the cracked lips and point at your uniform. Is that for warmth or for show? You bite back a retort, clutch your meager bread ration, and stare at the smoke drifting from their chimneys. An invitation you can't accept. 6. The Kremlin's Iron Heart. Napoleon's headquarters occupies the Kremlin, where he writes dispatches by candlelight, oblivious to the frost creeping under his tent flaps. Couriers sprint in and out, frost clinging to their beards, clutching bulletins about retreat options that never materialize. Rumors swirl of coal reserves deep beneath the palace, enough to heat the city for a week. Yet no one can find the secret shaft, and hungry soldiers slip inside empty cellars, hoping for stashed firewood. When they find nothing, they kick through plaster until the cold buries them alive. 7. Breakdown of discipline, insanity. Without reliable rations or shelter, units fragment. Sergeants shout futile orders. Privates respond with cigarette-smoking cavalrymen still in their saddles. Nightly drums of assembly attract fewer souls each time. You watch young conscripts huddle under parked cannon carriages, whispering to stave off madness. One man points at his reflection in a frozen puddle and argues with his own face. Another tears off his coat to wrap around a comrade, even as he shivers in a threadbare shirt. Orders become meaningless. Survival becomes the only command. 8. The dark art of scavenger warfare. Napoleon preached maneuver, but now you're reduced to guerrilla foraging. Small bands slip out before dawn, scavenging rooftops for firewood, barns for scraps of hay, and gardens for scraps of root vegetables. Encounters with civilians yield furtive exchanges, a hunk of stale goat cheese for a good boot, a handful of barley for a bartered night's shelter. Each transaction carries a risk of betrayal or ambush. If the Russians discover your route, they'll set fire to the barn and leave the roof to collapse on you. Scavenging feels more perilous than any battle. 9. The ghosts, less of the fallen army. By the end of January, the city is a phantasmagoria of frozen muskets, timber skeletons, and phantom soldiers trudging through snowdrifts. You dream of home and wake to the echo of your own boots cracking the ice. The corpses of fallen comrades lie half exposed in streets, their buttons still glinting in dawn light. Some bold souls drag bodies into church crypts, hoping to muffle the groans of winter, but the tombs are overcrowded. You hear the dead scratching beneath floorboards, reckoning they'd rather bite the living than stay entombed in the cold. 10. The slippery slope to part 4. If you think reaching Moscow was the climax, you're mistaken. The real horror begins when orders finally come to retreat, into a wasteland made worse by broken supply depots and impassable ice roads. In part 4, we'll follow the Grande Armée's ghostly march out of Russia, where death tolls eclipse even the worst estimates, and the bitterest lesson is that winter doesn't care who wields the eagles of Paris. Brace your heart and lace your boots tight, because the homeward march is a nightmare deeper than any you've faced so far. You thought reaching Moscow was the peak of despair? The true nightmare unfolds on the retreat, when the Grande Armée staggers back through an even more merciless wilderness, prey to starvation, frost, and the very elements they once thought to command. The order at last arrives: fall back on Smolensk. You gather what's left of your kit, half the buttons missing, the shako crumpled, your greatcoat nothing more than tatters of wool, and join the throng pouring out of the city gates. The roads are clogged with abandoned wagons, broken artillery, and the frozen carcasses of horses whose riders could not deliver them to safety. Each step away from the ruined spires of Moscow feels like a step deeper into Siberia. Within hours, your column straggles into a wasteland of white that swallows landmarks. Trees disappear, telegraph posts collapse into drifts, and the horizon blends sky and snow into a void. Commanders fan out in skirmish formation, hoping to spot the rearguard Cossacks before they strike. But the Cossacks strike in ghosts, their silhouettes flickering through storm curtains. They slash at flanks, cut supply sledges loose, and vanish, leaving you with the broken bodies of comrades to bury, or more often, to leave for scavengers. The supply situation is worse than before. The depots Napoleon left behind have either been plundered or buried under wind-blown drifts 8 feet deep. Quartermasters hound peasants for food, but the peasants have already eaten their own seed grain. You spend hours hammering at frozen crates, only to find empty husks. The occasional cache of grain offers a moment's ecstasy, stealing handfuls to your mouth and swallowing chunks without chewing, but turns to agony when the cold crystallizes in your gut. You press on, driven by the sergeant's whistle and the damned knowledge that halting means certain death. Men begin to drop from exhaustion and frostbite. Officers have strict orders, leave no man behind. Yet by the second week, that order becomes a hollow word. Bodies lie curled in snowdrifts with their swords still clenched in blue-numbed fingers. When you come upon one such drift, you see footprints skirt around it, as if the men still walking hope you won't notice. You pause only long enough to curse the general staff, then keep moving. The cold has a perverse talent for unraveling discipline. Guards fall asleep on sentry posts and freeze to death where they slump. Small groups break off to seek shelter in forests, only to be hunted by wolves more organized than any company of infantry. You once heard that a single wolf can bring down an elk, but here, packs pursue frost-ridden humans like prey, harrying their movements and attacking the wounded. You cradle your musket as if it might drive them off, but a wolf's jaws are colder than your uniform and stronger than your resolve. Bivouac nights become displays of desperation. When you can find treetop branches, you build crude shelters about chest high, crawl inside, and huddle with 2 or 3 fellow survivors. A small fire of driftwood warms your face for a moment, then the wind snatches the flames away. You sleep in shifts of 10 minutes, deranged by cold and terror. In dreams you march naked across a frozen sea. You wake to find one of your companions gone, vanished into the night, or taken by wolves, and you cannot tell which. As the column nears Smolensk, frostbite yields to starvation and disease. Your legs have grown so gaunt you can see the outlines of kneecaps under threadbare gaiters. The surgeon's tent is a field hospital no better than a morgue. You hear the tapping of splints, the snap of bone as frostbitten limbs are removed without anesthetic. The cries echo into the night air, a morbid lullaby. When you pass by, you see sheets stained black with gangrene. You avert your eyes, fearing the sight will freeze your blood. Rations are down to half-cooked grains scrounged from stumps, boiled rabbit they catch in snares, and the occasional pocket of salted pork, so salty you vomit half of it back into the snow. You chew the meat anyway, hoping the sodium will keep you alive a few more minutes. Men barter their shakos and muskets for spoonfuls of soup. Some offer their own boots, their trousers, or their last blanket. One private with missing toes traded his bayonet for a crust of rye so stale it cracked his teeth. The final horror is the realization that retreat is not rescue. At Smolensk, the city is in ashes, its granaries blown sky high to deny you the meager stores you so desperately need. Napoleon's headquarters has evacuated to army fortifications further west. You arrive to find cannons frozen in place, ammunition ruined, and half the soldiers gone, dead, deserted, or abandoned in the forests. The last orders you receive are for another retreat, another 100 miles. No supplies lie beyond. The distance ahead is a gauntlet of bone-white despair. Morning after morning, the phenomenon you once took for a starless night reveals itself as a day that never warms. The sun rises in a pale arc, inches your world into a glacial limbo for a few hours, and sinks again behind indistinct drifts. You can measure time only by how many of your brothers lie in the road, bodies stiff as planks. You grit your teeth to avoid weeping. Tears freeze instantly when they leave your eyes and sting your cheeks. Then, one bitter dawn, you stumble upon a small group of Allied troops, Prussians, hungry and frostbitten, walking toward you with empty eyes. They are as ragged as you are. Their uniforms are threadbare rags of blue and white. They shuffle past without greeting, as if you are a part of the landscape. It takes you a moment to realize that camaraderie has been swallowed by the cold, and you are now strangers to one another. As the days blur, the count of survivors dwindles. Memoirs later record that 100,000 left Moscow. Only 10,000 reached the Niemen River alive. You wonder whether you'll be one of the lucky 10th, or just another corpse scavenged by wolves. You press on because standing still in a winter march is the same as surrendering to oblivion. Finally, you cross the Niemen's frozen width at dawn, a sheet of ice so thick you can walk across it without fear of falling through. Yet the river is a trap. Men collapse in the middle, snow drifting over them like a shroud. You help draw a comrade out, face to face with his last breath, then watch his body slump. The ice groans under the weight of thousands, an ominous chorus that reminds you nature holds all the cards. On the far bank, a handful of wagons waits, damaged, empty, and unhelpful. The road beyond is a highway of the dead. You trudge forward, fevered by hunger, nails splitting, joints arthritic. Each footstep is a negotiation with pain. Each breath is a triumph of will. You think of home, of your wife's face in a memory so distant that you question whether it ever existed. The idea of hearth and comfort has become a cruel illusion. Eventually, the column merges into reach of Elbing, where rumors circulate of food and shelter. You arrive to find only refugees, peasants displaced by the French invasion, and a commissariat in meltdown. You barter your musket for a bowl of fish soup that tastes of old oil. A local farmer's wife gives you a woolen cap in exchange for your bootlaces. You wear it gratefully, though it pinches your skull. Amid the chaos of rebuilding a new army, you learn that Napoleon has abandoned the campaign entirely, returning to Paris to shore up defenses at home. In a cruel twist, you survive the march only to be assigned to rebuild the very roads and bridges you destroyed on the advance. You labor in freezing mud, handing stones to conscripts who revile you as the enemy. The irony is bitter. You remain a tool of imperial ambition, trapped in its engines long after the glory has fled. And so you realize the final truth. Crossing into safety does not mean the end of suffering. The Grande Armée returns to France diminished, skeletons of regiments clutching medals they have no right to wear. You reach your hometown to find it changed. Fields lie fallow, towns labor under economic collapse, and your neighbors look at you as though you've stepped from a horror tale. You cannot explain what you endured, and they cannot believe it. You are in exile among your own people. The Napoleonic Winter March was not just a military blunder. It was a crucible that tested human limits and found them wanting. Men froze not only to death, but to madness, their bodies and spirits broken by a campaign that promised triumph but delivered annihilation. You survived only by denying your own humanity, trading compassion for calculation, hope for numb endurance. If you ever consider heroism in war, recall this. The frost does not distinguish between the brave and the foolish. It only takes what it can, leaving the rest as warning and lament. And long after your footprints vanish in snow, the memory of that winter will endure. etched in the bones of those who fell, and in the hearts of those few who bore witness to an army undone by its own grandeur. Hey guys, imagine being crammed into a wooden bathtub the size of your living room, drenched in spray and reeking of fish guts, with 60 strangers who think hygiene is a Norse myth. Welcome aboard the Longship from Valhalla, population U. That was your 10-second warning. Now brace yourself for part 1 of why you wouldn't survive life on a Viking longship. 1. Press ganged before breakfast. You're a peasant farmer, one sunrise, and by sunset you've been invited aboard the Drakkar Droppa. No formal enlistment, no paperwork. Just a hulking berserker slamming his shield into your back and growling, "Row!" Your farming tools are replaced by an oar, so heavy it feels like hollowed out oak. You haven't eaten since dawn, and now you'll row until sundown, or you'll learn how quickly an unruly peasant turns into shark bait. 2. The sleeping quarters. There's no cabin. Your bunk is the keel itself. You lie on planks, drenched by every cresting wave. The blanket is a tattered wool cloak shared among 4 men, if you're lucky enough to snag it before dawn's chill. Rats skitter between your legs, nibbling your boots and your toes if you're not careful. When you do drift off, it's to the lullaby of cracking timbers and the occasional scream as someone tumbles overboard. 3. Seasickness. The god of the waves' gift. Within minutes of departure, your stomach revolts. Salt spume fills your mouth, and you spend more time heaving than breathing. The oar in your hand presses against your spine as you double over, clutching the gunwale. Your comrades belt out rose songs, their voices booming. Newsflash, rhythmic bellowing only makes you more nauseated. By midday, you're so weak you can barely lift the oar. The quartermaster snarls, "Row or swim." 4. Constant dampness in the fungus forest. The North Sea spray soaks your clothes to the bone. Sun never dries you. Wind never warms you. Within days, your skin peels under a layer of salt scabs. Between your toes, fungus takes root like palace mold. The foot bath is the same seawater you row through, pumping full of plankton, jellyfish, and mysterious wriggling, things you don't want to identify. Congratulations, your personal ecosystem now includes barnacles. 5. Daily grind. Eat, row, and pray. Meal times are haphazard. You grab a hunk of sea-damp bread rubbed with fish oil and gnaw until your jaws ache. Supper might be a boiled herring so small you mistake it for a sardine. Water? Rainwater collected by your shield, filtered through your cloak. You chase each meager meal with a slug of brackish beer brewed by the quartermaster. It's essentially watered-down swamp stew, but you swallow gratefully, because dehydration kills faster than an axe to the head. 6. Crew hierarchy. From oarsman to Odin's dinner. You're at the bottom of the chain. The helmsman barks navigation orders in Old Norse jargon you don't understand. The skipper stands high on the forecastle, pointing at distant shores you can't even see through the fog. If you screw up, miss a stroke, or row out of rhythm, you earn a crack from a birch branch or a shove into the freezing water. Mercy, that's for the weak, and you'll look weak if you start begging. 7. Weather, your eternal nemesis. Storms arrive without warning. The sky goes black. Waves tower like sea monsters. You cling to the rail as the ship crests a 50-foot wall of water, hearts in mouths. The oars are lifted free of the water, slamming back and forth like medieval torture devices. You taste fear in every swallow of salt spray. Lightning forks overhead, illuminating your drenched face and the terror in your crewmates' eyes. There's no lifeboat, just a wooden coffin rocking on a stormy grave. 8. The rot of wood and hull. Longships aren't sealed steel tubes. Planks shift, seams open, icy squalls squirt through every crack. As you row, water floods the bilge faster than you can bail. You and your mate crouch with buckets, scooping the tide back overboard. If you slack off, the ship founders. If you're diligent, your arms cramp and you pray for death, or at least a break. 9. Mythical monsters, mostly in your head. Beyond frost and fish comes fear of what lurks beneath. Every shadowy swell could hide a sea serpent or a kraken's sucker-marked tentacle. Your mind conjures mythic beasts to explain the thunderous groan of timbers. Whispers ripple through the crew. The Nidhogger hunts us. If morale dips below freezing, someone suggests sacrificing the weakest oarsman to appease the gods. You sleep with one eye open. 10. The first taste of battle, long before the shore. Before you even sight land, you may fight. Rival Vikings, Irish coastal defenders, or Frankish ships guard the channel. When sails appear on the horizon, you drop oars and scramble for spears. Your hands are numb, your breath a plume of frost. You lunge at the enemy's side, bellowing war cries that sound more like drowning than defiance. Arrows hiss, axes swing, and you learn quickly. Blood may warm you briefly, but only momentarily before the cold reclaims your heat and your hope. By the end of part 1, you're soaked, starving, and scared senseless, just as the Longship was intended to be. If you thought Viking raids were heroic sagas, think again. They were floating nightmares. What's next in part 2? Brace yourself for the next leg of this voyage. We'll dig into the chaos of coastal raids, the gut-wrenching oar battles, and why shield walls crumbling under hailstorms of arrow fire are less cinematic triumph and more collective bloodbath. Stay tuned and keep your cloak buttoned tight, because the real horror hits when you step ashore. By the time part 2 begins, you've already been pressed into service, seasick, soaked, and terrified. Now let's escalate the nightmare. Coastal raids, oar battles, and the absurd logistics of medieval naval warfare. Ready to trade your hopes for horror? Let's go. 1. The raiding muster. Dawn breaks, if you can call it that in the gray northern sky, and the Skald's horns summon you to the bow. You clamber over hatches while the skipper unfurls the carved dragon's prow, meant to frighten locals. In reality, it just leaks nasal mucus from carved nostrils. A half-dozen berserkers laugh with drunken abandon, sharpening blades on your ankles as they greet the day. You choke on salt spray and stale ale fumes, realizing morning motivation in Viking terms equals hope you survive until noon. 2. Approaching the shore, into the lion's den. The Longship glides toward a defenseless hamlet, clay huts, thatched roofs, and frightened farmers flicking torches. Your heart hammers as you swap your oar for an axe. The oars snap into the struts. The hull grinds onto sand. You leap overboard up to your waist in freezing brine, then clamber onto beach. Your boots fill with sand and blood. You stagger through screaming pigs and wailing children. Berserkers sprint past, hacking at fences and tossing toddlers like rag dolls. You wonder if valor means commit atrocities. 3. The looting ballet Vikings prize speed. In 50 seconds, the crew ransacks one hut, stealing butter churns, goats, and a grandmother's wooden ladle. You're told to grab treasure, gleaming chalices, silks, and bejeweled combs. Instead, you find copper coins so thin they bend under your thumb, and half-eaten cheese that smells like a troll's armpit. Locals flee with pitchforks. You grin and stab at their heels. A peasant woman screams, but you can't hear over the berserker's war cry. You pocket a wooden spoon, your only victory. 4. The run back to the ship. With your booty in hand, you dash through thrashing rearguard skirmishers and volley sticks. The shore behind you erupts in flames as torches ignite straw huts. You sprint back to the Longship's ramp, slipping on seaweed. A shield wall forms. You shove an enemy aside with your oar, cracking ribs. You scramble aboard, soaked and panting as villagers hurl rocks. The ship's stern dips under the weight of stolen loot. Quick fix. Toss your own boots and tunic overboard. You cling to the gunwale, ankle deep in dripping spoils. 5. War battles, the synchronized suicide. No time to stow spoils. Enemy longships appear on the horizon, shields locked and oars poised. You toss your axe aside and seize your oar. Again, now you row not for exploration, but for survival. The helmsman barks commands in thick Norse dialect that sounds like row or die, row or die. Omen sobered, you wedge your toes between planks and pull with every fiber of your muscle, only to watch your ship side by side with a rival drakkar. Swords ring, shields clash, oars slip, chaos reigns. 6. The boarding frenzy. You board the enemy's deck, feet slick with rain and ichor. Your muscled arms can't swing fast enough. Every time you strike, someone else slices your calf. The deck tilts beneath a hail of arrows. Screams mix with crashing shields. You trip and faceplant in a puddle of entrails. A berserker drags you up by your braid and bashes your skull with his shield. You see stars, but no valor, just vacuum. 7. The retreat under fire. Your side is losing. The The rival captain signals for retreat, a rare mercy. You leap back onto your longship, clutching half your shield. The enemy's front lines chase you to water's edge, flinging javelins. You row with the desperation of a man who just realized he might have chosen the wrong life. Tears freeze on your cheeks, but you can't stop. The oars splash in unison. The shore recedes as arrows zing overhead. 8. Medical care at sea. Back on board, the Scald tracks the wounded. "Let me see that," he says, prying arrows from ruptured flesh with a fishbone. Blood gushes, mixing with salt water. He slaps a poultice of crushed clam shells onto the wound, pronouncing it healed. You moan, but he's already moved on to the berserker who lost his earlobe. Hygiene? That's voodoo magic. 9. Navigating the night. As twilight descends, you huddle near the mast, draped in stolen silks that do nothing to warm you. The navigator squints at the stars, then curses. They've migrated south. He consults a rune-carved oar stub, predicting land somewhere east. You blink through the spray, wondering if you'll die of cold before you reach wood for fire. 10. The moral reckoning. In the dim glow of the hold's lantern, you count bodies, friends you never knew, foes you never loved. You cradle your wooden spoon and wonder, is this glory, or is this just a floating slaughterhouse? The churning ocean sings a lullaby of the damned. You pray to Odin for one more sunrise. If you see it, maybe you'll live to regret this voyage. Part 2 has shown you the raw brutality of Viking raids. No heroics, just horror. In Part 3, we'll explore life deeper at sea, scurvy's reign, magical beliefs, shipboard justice, and why the voyage home might be even more harrowing than the raiding itself. Stay afloat, if you can. By the time you're reading this, more than half the crew has succumbed to scurvy, madness, or sheer despair, and you're next. This chapter plunges you into the rotting heart of shipboard life, the disease that eats you alive, the rituals meant to ward off Odin's wrath, the brutal justice dispensed on a plank, and the mental unraveling that turns even the fiercest warrior into a gibbering wreck. The slow poison of scurvy. 2 weeks into open sea, your gums begin bleeding. Tiny crimson beads erupt whenever you chew your meager ration of dried fish. At first, you mistake it for a fishbone cut, until your teeth loosen and you wake each dawn dribbling blood onto your tunic. Scurvy is the quiet executioner, joint pain so excruciating you cannot grasp an oar, swollen legs that refuse to hold your weight, and a fatigue so bone deep you lie on the deck staring at the dragon's carved stern, wondering why the wood seems so bright and alive compared to you. The ship's medic, a barber surgeon who learned anatomy by dissecting fish, offers a miracle cure of boiled seaweed broth. You drink it, choking on kelp strands, and the pain only worsens. You beg for lemons, for anything green, but the crew has no gardens, and the nearest fresh fruit lies thousands of miles away. The mortification of knowing your body is literally turning on you, rotting from the inside out, is a terror more profound than any raid. Shelter in the rafters, cold without end. As scurvy takes your strength, the North Atlantic's chill deepens. You climb into the ship's rigging at night, seeking warmth in the swaying yardarms, but the wind slices through your cloak like a blade. Ice forms on your eyelashes, each blink flakes off like shards of glass. Below, your shipmates stomp across the deck, trying to melt snow for a pitiful fire, cursing the gods when wet wood refuses to ignite. You realize warmth is a fleeting illusion, a memory you can no longer summon at will. The ghosts of the hold. Underneath the deck, the hold is a tomb. Rats feast on spoiled grain, then scurry over your sleeping roll. Beneath your blanket of seaweed and wet wool, you hear scratching, tiny claws chewing on leather and bone. You curse the dark and the wet, and sometimes whisper prayers to Heimdallr to banish the vermin, only to have your pleas drowned by the thunder of waves above. Sleep is a black hole where your nightmares swim. Visions of rats gnawing at your face, of the deck tilting and trapping you beneath it, of your own body drifting away like a lost driftwood. Shipboard superstitions and sacrifices. Desperate for any advantage, the crew resorts to superstition. Each dawn, the Skald chants a ritual verse asking Loki to spare them mishap. The helmsman carves runes into oar handles to guide the boat home, while the quartermaster tosses a portion of meager rations overboard as an offering to Njord, hoping for calmer seas. Occasionally, a chicken is thrown into the sea to appease Aegir, though the bird's frantic flapping costs more manpower to retrieve than the ritual is worth. You stand by helplessly, forced to participate in ceremonies that feel like mockeries of religion, because faith in masks made from goatskin simply cannot drown out the roar of the storm. The cruelty of shipboard justice law aboard a Viking longship is swift and brutal. When two berserkers clash over the last splinter of dried goat meat, the captain summons them before the stem. Their knuckles are bleeding, breaths ragged. Both demand satisfaction by duel. The captain allows one swing of the axe each. One man falls, and the survivor guts him with his bare hands. No formal sentence follows. The victor simply drags the corpse overboard. Later, the ghostly splash echoes like final judgment. You witness this and feel the line between justice and barbarism blur into indistinction, and you know if you step out of line, your fate will be the same. Homesickness as mental leprosy. Months away from Scandinavia, you begin to forget your home. When a sailor mentions the smell of pine forests, your stomach twists with longing, and then with nausea, because you haven't smelled anything but salt and sweat in weeks. Letters from families of raided villages arrive as texts carved into shields and hung on the mast. Your father weeps, one reads. You wonder if the messages are true or just troll bait. Each night, you clutch your leather pouch, once containing your wife's sentinel bead, and find it empty. You realize your soul has been left behind on frozen plains thousands of miles away. Violence as entertainment. With nothing else to do, the crew turns to blood sport. Devoid of fresh meat and fresh purpose, they stage axe contests where two men, blinded by scurvy-induced delirium, swing wildly at each other inside the hull. You're forced to cheer, oar in hand, as limbs are mangled and blood pools at the keel. The survivors howl with triumph, but the stench of gore soaks into the planks and lingers in your nostrils for nights thereafter. You gag, swallow your revulsion, and try to remind yourself that this is camaraderie. But you know it's just another form of slow torture. Mid-voyage mutiny and its aftermath. When the crew's desperation peaks, whispers of mutiny ripple through the ranks. You overhear half a dozen warriors plotting to overthrow the captain, install a democratic council of oarsmen to decide the next raid. But in a society where might is right, democracy means blood. The captain, tipped off by a fearful helmsman, storms into the hold at night and clamps iron shackles on the ringleaders. By dawn, the mutineers are hanged from the yardarms, wooden crosses against gray sky. Their bodies sway in the wind, eyes bulging, tongues lolling. The lesson is clear. Any challenge to authority will be met with spectacle and death. You row that day with tears of rage freezing on your cheeks. The coral-cold embrace of storms. Even the gods seem to conspire against you when storms hit. Thunder cracks, though the sky is low and gray, and bolts of lightning illuminate sails like spectral banners. Waves tower overhead, black and monstrous, then slam into the hull with enough force to crack ribs through planks. You cling to the rail, eyes wide, as the longship pitches and rolls, spilling men into the churning troughs. When the green water crashes on deck, it carries with it foam, fish, and the shattered bits of ore. You scramble to bail out water with a broken stave, tears mixing with seawater. No distinction is possible anymore. The price of survival. By the end of the third month, only a quarter of the original raiders remain. Your body is a catalog of wounds. Scurvy sores, frost-bitten toes, axe gashes, and the slow ache of bones that have learned too well the shape of a single oarlock. Yet you row on, driven by a primal refusal to be left behind. Each dawn, you stand on deck, gasp in the cold, and offer silent thanks if your name is still called during muster. You watch new sailors conscripted in foreign fjords take your place, fresh and unaware, their fate sealed by the keening song of the wind and the weight of history carved on the prow. Part 3 ends here, but your nightmare has only one certainty. The voyage home will demand an even higher toll. In Part 4, we'll follow the ragged survivors as they turn back toward distant shores, confront shipwreck, starvation, and the heartbreak of returning to a world that has moved on without them. Stay alive, if you dare, to see how few make it home. By the time you see land silhouette through salt-stung eyes, your body has betrayed you more times than your foes ever could. This final chapter follows the shattered remnants of the crew as they limp back to North shores, only to discover that homecoming can feel like a death sentence in its own right. 1. The broken Dwawage home. You thought the raid was hell, the return is purgatory. The Longship creaks under half its original weight. Oars gone, shields used as splints, crew reduced to ghosts, supplies are exhausted. There's no more fresh water, no stale bread left, only the rancid fat scraped from the bilge. Each dawn brings a prayer that landfall is near, until you realize you've been aiming for the same horizon for weeks. Every wave you crest feels like you're riding further into oblivion. 2. Shipwreck on the Skerries. When the coast finally arrives, it isn't the friendly fjord you remember, but a labyrinth of rocky skerries hidden beneath fog. The helmsman, his mind hollowed by scurvy delirium, misjudges the channel. A thunderous crack shakes the hull as the keel plows into hidden rock. Water gushes through splintered planks. You scramble overboard, clutching broken oars, and dash toward a boulder-strewn shore. The sea drags half the crew under. The survivors wash up, coughing seawater and blood onto hostile stone. 3. The struggle up the cliffs. Climbing the jagged cliffs is like grappling with trolls. Your frost-bitten fingers slip on slick moss, and bleeding cuts catch on sharp lichens. You heave your aching body upward, each breath a dagger in your ribs. Behind you, men cry out as they slip, rolling into icy pools below. The cliff face demands a toll. Broken limbs, shredded tunics, and endless terror. When you finally stand atop the bluffs, the coastline below wavers in sun-spangled haze, proof that survival can feel as unreal as a fever dream. 4. The village of the unwelcome beyond the cliffs lies a fishing hamlet, where villagers glare at your tattered procession. They've heard tales of raiders and fallen men. Now they see your mangled bodies, strangers speaking a dead tongue, eyes hollow as driftwood. The elder woman spits at your boots, accusing you of desecration. You offer trade, salted herring, knotted nets, but she drives you off with a sharpened pitchfork. You depart with nothing but shame and the knowledge that homecoming brings no warmth. 5. The cold hearths of home. When you finally stagger into your own village, your kin barely recognize you. Your hall is shuttered, the hearth cold for months. Your wife, believing you dead, has remarried. Your children, if they survived plague and famine, are wary of the man who returns with eyes too old and hands too scarred. You crave the comfort of a wooden stool and a bowl of pottage, but the world you left is gone. No feast welcomes you, only the quiet judgment of neighbors who whisper, "He came back alive, what curse follows him now?" 6. The cost of glory bards sing of your raid, tales of sackings, dragon prows, and silver hoards. But the only treasure you carry is a handful of copper trinkets worthless beyond your grasp. Each bauble reminds you of the souls lost under your oar, of the blood you spilled and the blood spilled on your behalf. You display them on your mantle, hoping for pride, but instead they weigh on your heart like lead. Nobody wants the story of how you nearly died, only the myth of your daring. 7. The haunting of the Longship. Weeks after you return, you awaken from nightmares of creaking timbers and flailing oars. In your mind's eye, the Drakkar Drapa still drifts on open ocean, its dragon prow pointing into storm. You've tried to burn your ship's model and break your oar, but the wood splinters into familiar shapes, the curve of the hull, the grain of the seat, the ring where your arm braced. Even in daylight, you glimpse its silhouette in every wave. The fjord calls you back, into the abyss you barely escaped. 8. The silent legacy. Your fellow survivors disperse to farms, mercenary companies, or monastic cloisters to escape their memories. Some become berserkers again, channeling their rage into endless violence. Others swear oaths of peace only to tremble at every thunderclap and every creaking door. Their children inherit their nightmares, stories of fathers who rode too far, never to be the same again. The Longship's voyage becomes a silent curse passed down by word of mouth, warning each generation that some journeys never truly end. 9. The truth about Viking life. If you believed Viking life was glorious, swords gleaming, shields shining, warriors roaring, you were sold a saga, not reality. Real Vikings spent more nights bailing water, stitching frostbitten flesh, and begging farmers for a crust of rye than they did reveling in mead halls. They died at sea more often than in battle. Their sagas celebrated glory, but glossed over the brutal math. For every raid worth remembering, dozens of men vanished into the cold, anonymous in the deep. 10. The final reckoning. So here's the truth. You wouldn't survive life on a Viking longship because it was a floating crucible designed to break you, body, mind, and spirit, long before you reached the battlefield. The oar was your master, the sea your executioner, and the shore your false promise of safety. What you returned with wasn't gold or honor, but a host of wounds and a soul permanently adrift. If you ever dream of conquest, remember, the world of the Vikings wasn't a stage for heroes, but a gauntlet of misery, where survival was the greatest victory, and even that came at a price you could never pay.